A former Navy SEAL walked into a small-town bank carrying a court-issued check worth more than $300,000. Minutes later, he was accused of fraud, surrounded by security, and threatened with arrest. The manager believed a man who looked like him could never own a check like that. Most people stayed silent. His loyal German Shepherd did not. What began as a simple bank visit would uncover years of discrimination, forgotten victims, and a scandal hiding in plain sight. Subscribe, turn on the bell, and stay with us until the very end. A cold Montana wind swept across the valley as pale morning sunlight touched the last patches of snow along the roadside. Ryan Carter sat behind the wheel of an aging cream-colored pickup truck and watched the town appear beyond the windshield. Beside him sat Max, a 6-year-old German Shepherd with a powerful black and tan frame, intelligent amber eyes, and the calm discipline of a military dog, despite never having officially served. Max rarely barked without reason. Years living alongside Ryan had taught him patience, awareness, and an uncanny ability to sense tension before humans noticed it. Ryan reached over and scratched behind the dog's ears. "We're almost done, buddy." The words sounded simple, but they carried 4 years of exhaustion. At 35, Ryan still looked every bit like the Navy SEAL he once was. He stood well over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered and muscular, with short, dark brown military-cut hair, a strong jawline, and light stubble that never quite disappeared. His gray-blue eyes were often described as distant by strangers. They were the eyes of a man who had seen too much and spoken too little about it. The lawsuit had nearly broken him. The mining company had seized land that had belonged to his family for generations. What began as a dispute over property lines had become years of legal battles, appeals, delays, and intimidation. Many people would have given up. Ryan almost had, more than once. But every time he considered walking away, he remembered his father's voice. Some things aren't valuable because of what they're worth. They're valuable because they're yours. Yesterday, a federal judge had finally ruled in his favor. The compensation check, now resting inside a weathered envelope on the passenger seat, was worth more than $300,000. For most people, it was life-changing money. For Ryan, it felt like proof that his father hadn't been forgotten. The pickup rolled into town. The bank stood near the center of Main Street, its glass front reflecting the morning sky. Ryan parked, grabbed the envelope, and stepped out. Max immediately jumped down beside him. Several people entering the bank glanced at the dog. Most smiled. Max ignored them. His attention remained fixed on Ryan. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of polished marble and fresh coffee. A young teller greeted customers near the entrance. An elderly couple sat waiting on a bench. A mother held the hand of a little girl near the service desk. For a moment, everything seemed ordinary. Ryan took a number and waited quietly. When his turn came, he approached the counter and handed over the check. The teller was a young man in his 20s named Ethan Brooks, slim and clean-cut, with nervous eyes and neatly combed blonde hair. He seemed polite enough, but uncertainty flashed across his face the moment he saw the amount printed on the document. His fingers hesitated above the keyboard. "One moment, sir." Ryan nodded. The teller disappeared into a nearby office. Minutes passed. People began looking over. Ryan felt the familiar weight of unwanted attention. He had never enjoyed being watched. The office door opened. A man emerged. Branch manager Gregory Harlan walked toward the counter with long, confident strides. Gregory was in his late 50s, tall and lean, with silver hair, carefully combed back from a narrow face. His expensive suit fit perfectly. Everything about him suggested success and control. Years climbing corporate ranks had given him the habit of judging people within seconds. Unfortunately, he trusted those judgments too much. He picked up the check. Then he looked at Ryan, then at Ryan's boots, then at Max. Something changed in his expression. Not concern, not caution. Dismissal. "Quite a document you've brought in today." Ryan remained calm. "It was issued yesterday." Gregory gave a short laugh. "For over $300,000? "That's correct." The manager folded his arms. "And this belongs to you?" The question hung in the air. Several nearby customers looked up. Ryan felt his stomach tighten. He had encountered this tone before. Not in banks, not in courtrooms, but enough places throughout his life to recognize it immediately. Yes. Gregory stared at him. You expect me to believe that? The lobby grew quieter. Ryan felt Max shift slightly beside him. The dog's ears rose, a warning sign. Ryan rested one hand on Max's neck. The manager continued. A man walks in wearing old military boots, arrives in a truck that looks older than some of my employees, and suddenly presents a check worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The teller looked uncomfortable. Several customers exchanged glances. Ryan felt heat rise inside his chest, not anger, disappointment. After 4 years of fighting for justice, he had expected relief. Not this. The court records can verify everything, Ryan said. Gregory smiled. We'll decide what needs verifying. The next 10 minutes only grew worse. The manager questioned the legitimacy of the lawsuit, questioned the land ownership, questioned the source of the money, questioned Ryan himself. Every answer seemed to make him more suspicious. Finally, Gregory turned toward a security guard standing near the entrance. I'd like assistance over here. The entire lobby went silent. The elderly couple stopped talking. The little girl stared. Even the tellers looked uneasy. The guard approached. Max stood, slowly, deliberately. The German Shepherd didn't growl. He didn't bark, but every muscle in his body became rigid. Gregory pointed toward Ryan. I'm concerned this may be attempted fraud. A murmur spread through the lobby. Ryan could hardly believe what he was hearing. 4 years in court, a federal ruling, a legitimate compensation check, and now this. The manager pulled out his phone. Then, without taking his eyes off Ryan, he spoke words that made several people gasp. Call the police. Even the security guard blinked. Sir, you heard me. Ryan looked down at Max. The dog stared toward the front entrance. Not at the manager, not at the guard, at the door, as if he sensed something approaching. Then Gregory looked directly at Ryan and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, If that check is fake, you're going to jail today. And somewhere beyond the glass doors of the bank, a police siren began to echo through town. The distant siren grew louder until blue and red lights flashed across the glass walls of the bank lobby. Ryan Carter remained seated. Years of military service had taught him something most people never learned. Panic rarely improved a situation. Beside him, Max sat perfectly still. The German Shepherd's amber eyes tracked every movement in the room. While customers whispered among themselves, the dog appeared strangely calm. Ryan trusted that instinct. Max often sensed the true danger before anyone else. The bank doors opened. A uniformed police officer stepped inside. He looked younger than most officers Ryan had encountered, perhaps 30 years old. He was tall and athletic, with short brown hair, a square jaw, and steady eyes that suggested patience rather than aggression. His name badge read Marcus Bennett. Unlike many officers, Marcus did not immediately focus on the accusation. He focused on the people. His gaze moved from Gregory Harlan, standing near the counter, to the nervous security guard, then to Ryan and Max. Something about Ryan made him pause. Gregory stepped forward immediately. Officer, thank goodness you're here. Marcus nodded politely. What seems to be the problem? This man attempted to deposit a suspicious check worth over $300,000. I believe it may be fraudulent. Ryan noticed the word may. Only minutes earlier, Gregory had spoken as though fraud were already proven. Now that law enforcement had arrived, his confidence sounded less certain. Marcus approached the counter. May I see the check? The teller quickly handed it over. The officer examined the document carefully. The lobby fell silent. Even the customers recording on their phones stopped whispering. Ryan watched Marcus study the court seal. The officer's eyes narrowed slightly. Then he looked again, and again. Something had caught his attention. What was the case about? Marcus asked. A land dispute, Ryan replied. The mining company took property that belonged to my family. Marcus nodded. He looked at Ryan for several seconds. There was no hostility in his expression, only curiosity. Then his eyes widened. Wait. Ryan frowned slightly. Marcus took another step closer. Have we met before? Ryan searched his memory. The officer seemed familiar, but not enough to place. I don't think so. Marcus stared. My father nearly drowned during the Yellowstone flood 6 years ago. Ryan blinked. The memory returned instantly. A pickup truck trapped in rising water. An elderly rancher. A rescue rope. Freezing current. A terrified teenage boy screaming from the riverbank. The teenager had been 16. The man standing before him now was no longer a teenager. But the eyes were the same. The eyes. Marcus smiled. You pulled him out. The entire lobby became quiet again. Gregory's confident expression weakened. Ryan shrugged. It was a long time ago. It wasn't for my family. Marcus let out a breath. My father talks about that day every Christmas. Several customers exchanged glances. Gregory quickly interrupted. Officer, with respect, that isn't relevant. Marcus slowly turned toward him. It becomes relevant if you're accusing someone of a crime. The officer returned his attention to the document. He pulled out his radio and contacted dispatch. Then he requested verification from federal court records. The process took nearly 20 minutes. 20 long minutes during which nobody seemed comfortable. The elderly couple sitting on the bench continued watching. The mother with the little girl remained near the door. The tellers avoided eye contact with Gregory. Then. Only Max appeared relaxed. At one point, the dog lowered his head onto Ryan's boot and closed his eyes, as if he already knew how this would end. Finally, Marcus's radio crackled. The response came through. Case number confirmed. Court ruling. Confirmed. Payment confirmed. Federal settlement confirmed. Every detail matched. Marcus lowered the radio. The silence inside the bank felt almost physical. Then he spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. The document is legitimate. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Gregory's face tightened. Marcus continued. The settlement is real. The court order is real. The compensation amount is real. Ryan felt something inside him loosen, not relief. Relief would have come earlier. This felt more like exhaustion. 4 years of fighting, months of waiting, hours of legal paperwork. And now a police officer had needed less than half an hour to confirm what should never have been questioned in the first place. Marcus handed the check back. You're free to deposit it. Several customers quietly applauded. The elderly woman on the bench smiled. The young mother nodded toward Ryan. Even Ethan Brooks seemed relieved. But Gregory wasn't finished. No. The word shocked everyone. Marcus turned. What? I disagree. The manager folded his arms. His face had become red. I still believe something isn't right. The officer stared. You just heard federal verification. Gregory shook his head. There are scams involving stolen identities. There are forged documents. There are system errors. Ryan looked at him carefully. For the first time, he realized Gregory no longer seemed concerned about fraud. He seemed concerned about being wrong. And there was a difference. A very dangerous difference. Marcus took a slow breath. Mr. Harlan, there is absolutely no evidence of criminal activity. The manager's jaw tightened. I'm responsible for protecting this bank. And I'm responsible for enforcing the law. For several seconds, neither man spoke. The tension felt unbearable. Then the front doors opened once more. Everyone looked. A black luxury SUV had stopped outside. A woman stepped through the entrance. She appeared to be in her early 40s, tall and elegant, with chestnut brown hair styled neatly at shoulder length and sharp green eyes that missed very little. Her dark navy business coat looked expensive without being flashy. Years in executive leadership had given her a calm confidence that commanded attention without requiring volume. The moment she entered, every employee straightened. Even Gregory visibly froze. The woman looked around the lobby. Then her eyes landed on Ryan. For a second, she simply stared. Shock crossed her face. Not anger. Recognition. Real recognition. Ryan noticed her expression immediately. So did Max. The German shepherd stood, his ears lifted. The woman took several slow steps forward. Gregory swallowed hard. Ma'am. But she wasn't looking at him. She was looking at Ryan, as if she had just encountered someone she never expected to see again. And when she finally spoke, her voice carried through the silent bank. You. Ryan frowned. The woman seemed unable to believe what she was seeing. Then she whispered words that made Gregory's face lose all color. What happened here? For several seconds, nobody answered. The bank lobby stood frozen beneath the bright lights. Gregory Harlan looked as though the floor had vanished beneath him. Ryan Carter slowly rose from his chair. Max stood beside him, his broad shoulders level with Ryan's thigh, amber eyes focused on the woman who had just entered. The woman stared at Ryan with unmistakable recognition. Not the vague familiarity of someone trying to remember a face. This was something deeper, something personal. Finally, she stepped closer. I can't believe it's actually you. Ryan studied her carefully. The voice triggered a memory before the face did. Rain, twisted steel, a steep mountain road, a child crying. Then it came back. The woman smiled softly. You probably don't remember me. Ryan shook his head. I think I do. The woman's eyes glistened. My daughter would disagree. A quiet laugh escaped her. 3 years earlier, she had been driving home during a spring storm when a truck lost control on a narrow mountain pass. The collision had forced her SUV through a guardrail. The vehicle had rolled halfway down an embankment and come to rest against a cluster of pine trees. Ryan had been passing through the area. Most people would have called emergency services and waited. He had climbed down the cliff. He had cut through shattered glass. He had crawled into a vehicle that smelled of gasoline. And he had pulled a terrified 8-year-old girl to safety before rescuing her mother. The woman standing before him now was that mother. Her name was Victoria Langford. At 43, Victoria carried herself with the calm confidence of someone accustomed to responsibility. She was tall and slender, with chestnut brown hair falling neatly to her shoulders, sharp green eyes, and fair skin touched by a few lines, earned through years of hard decisions rather than age. She had spent nearly 2 decades working her way through the banking industry. Colleagues respected her because she listened before she spoke, and because she rarely forgot kindness. Especially kindness that had saved her child's life. She turned toward Gregory. What happened here? The manager swallowed. His voice sounded smaller now. There appears to have been a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Victoria glanced around the room. The expressions on the faces around her told their own story. Customers were still holding phones. Employees avoided eye contact. Marcus Bennett remained standing beside Ryan. Even the security guard appeared uncomfortable. Victoria noticed all of it. Years in executive leadership had trained her to read rooms quickly. This room was shouting. She walked to the counter. Start from the beginning. Nobody spoke. Then unexpectedly, the elderly woman sitting on the bench raised her hand. If you want the truth, I recorded most of it. Every head turned. The elderly woman introduced herself as Margaret Doyle, a retired librarian in her 70s with silver hair and bright blue eyes. Years helping children find books had left her with little patience for bullies. She handed her phone over. Victoria watched the footage. The entire lobby watched her face. The first video showed Gregory questioning Ryan. The second showed him publicly, implying the check could not belong to someone like Ryan. The third showed him calling security. By the fourth clip, Victoria's expression had become unreadable. When the video ended, she lowered the phone slowly. Then she turned toward Gregory. Did you verify the court document before calling the police? Gregory hesitated. No. Victoria's jaw tightened. Did you contact legal services? No. Did you contact corporate fraud prevention? No. The silence became painful. Victoria looked at him for several seconds. Then she spoke. You accused a customer of fraud before performing any verification procedures. Gregory tried to recover. The amount was unusual. Victoria looked directly at him. The amount is not evidence. He opened his mouth. She continued. The appearance of a customer is not evidence. The manager immediately looked away. Ryan noticed several employees quietly exchange glances, almost as if they had heard similar conversations before. That detail did not escape Victoria either. She turned toward Ethan Brooks. The young teller straightened nervously. "Mr. Brooks, has anything like this happened before?" Gregory immediately interrupted. "This is inappropriate." Victoria ignored him. The teller hesitated. Then he answered, "Yes." The room grew silent again. Victoria folded her arms. "Explain." Ethan swallowed. "There have been complaints." "What kind of complaints?" The young man looked toward Gregory, then toward the floor. "Customers being flagged for additional reviews." "How many?" "I don't know." Victoria's expression hardened. The answer bothered her, not because of what it revealed, because of what it suggested. She spent years investigating banking misconduct. Patterns mattered. And suddenly, she felt a pattern emerging. She looked toward Marcus Bennett. "Officer, would you mind remaining available a little longer?" "Of course." Victoria then made a phone call. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. When she ended it, Gregory appeared pale. "What was that?" he asked. Victoria met his gaze. "I just authorized a formal audit." The words landed like a hammer. Several employees looked stunned. Gregory looked terrified. "Audit?" "Immediately." "This is ridiculous." "Maybe." Her voice remained calm. "Then the audit will prove it." Ryan noticed Max watching Gregory. Not aggressively, curiously, as if the dog sensed the shift happening beneath the surface. For the first time all morning, Gregory seemed frightened, not angry, not offended, frightened. That reaction interested Ryan, because innocent people usually welcome investigations. Only guilty people fear what might be found. Victoria walked toward Ryan. Her expression softened. "I owe you an apology." "You don't." "Actually, I do." She glanced around the bank. "This happened inside one of my branches." Ryan looked at the check, still resting on the counter. For a moment he thought about his father, about the years spent fighting for justice, about how close he had come to walking away from the lawsuit entirely. Then he looked back at Victoria. "I just wanted to deposit the check." A faint smile appeared on her face. "I know." Before either could say anything more, one of the bank employees hurried from a back office carrying a folder. His face had gone white. He approached Victoria. "Ma'am." "What is it?" The employee lowered his voice, but not enough. Everyone nearby heard him. "We've already found something." Victoria took the folder. Her eyes moved across the documents. Then she looked up, slowly, directly at Gregory Harlan. And the fear on the manager's face suddenly became much, much worse. Chapter 4. The names in the files. The fear on Gregory Harlan's face told Ryan Carter everything before a single word was spoken. People who had done nothing wrong usually became defensive. People who had something to hide became afraid. The bank employee standing beside Victoria Langford looked as though he wished he had never opened the folder. Victoria accepted the documents and quietly moved toward a nearby desk. The lobby remained silent. Nobody left. Customers who had originally come to deposit checks, withdraw cash, or ask simple banking questions now found themselves witnessing something far more important. Ryan remained where he was. Max sat beside him. The German Shepherd occasionally glanced toward Gregory, whose confident posture had completely disappeared. The manager who had spent the morning controlling everyone around him now seemed unable to control himself. His hands trembled. His breathing had changed. And Ryan noticed sweat forming near his collar, despite the cool temperature inside the building. Victoria slowly reviewed the first set of records, then the second, then the third. With each page, her expression became more serious. Finally, she looked up. "How long has this branch been using manual verification overrides?" Gregory cleared his throat. "Years." "How many years?" 5, maybe 6. Victoria nodded. The answer itself wasn't alarming. Manual reviews existed for legitimate reasons. The problem was how they were being used. A few minutes later, 2 additional auditors arrived from the regional office. One of them was Harold Simmons, a broad-shouldered man in his early 60s, with gray hair, reading glasses, and the patient manner of someone who had spent 30 years investigating financial misconduct. Nothing about him appeared dramatic. Yet people often became nervous when he entered a room because he had built a reputation for finding things others missed. The second auditor was Melissa Grant, a woman in her late 40s with dark skin, short black hair, and sharp eyes. She had previously worked in regulatory compliance and possessed a relentless attention to detail. Small inconsistencies bothered her, the way loud alarms bothered other people. The 2 auditors immediately began reviewing transaction histories. Within 20 minutes, a pattern started emerging. Harold looked up first. Victoria. She walked over. "What did you find?" He turned the monitor toward her. 37 manual overrides. The number itself didn't seem shocking. Then he continued. Every single one was approved by the same manager. Victoria glanced toward Gregory. His face became pale. Melissa spoke next. And that's not the interesting part. She opened another report. The room grew quieter. Ryan noticed several employees stop pretending to work. Everyone was listening. Melissa pointed toward the screen. "Look at the customers." Victoria studied the list. One by one. The names, the ages, the notes. Then she slowly exhaled. Ryan couldn't see the screen, but he could see her reaction, and it wasn't good. "What is it?" Marcus Bennett asked. Melissa answered, "Most of them are elderly." Nobody spoke. She continued, "Others are veterans." Another pause, and several are low-income customers. The room became silent, the kind of silence that felt heavy. Gregory looked away. Victoria returned to the records. More examples appeared. A widow attempting to access insurance funds after her husband's death. A disabled veteran trying to cash a government settlement. A retired farmer depositing money from a land sale. Each case had something in common. Additional reviews. Unnecessary delays, suspicious comments, and in many cases customers simply gave up and left. Ryan felt anger begin to rise, not for himself, for them, because unlike him, they had never received justice. Unlike him, they hadn't had a police officer who recognized them, or a vice president who happened to walk through the door. Many had simply gone home, believing they had done something wrong. That thought bothered him more than Gregory's insults ever could. Several hours passed. The investigation continued. Then something unexpected happened. The elderly woman who had recorded the incident earlier slowly approached Victoria. Margaret Doyle looked determined. "I think I know one of those names." Victoria turned. "What do you mean?" Margaret pointed toward the list. "There." The name belonged to an 80-year-old widow. Margaret recognized her immediately. "They attend my church." Victoria looked interested. "What happened?" Margaret's voice softened. Her husband died 2 years ago. The widow had attempted to access money from a life insurance policy. The process became so difficult that she eventually abandoned the claim. She assumed she had made a mistake. Nobody had ever explained why. Victoria exchanged a glance with Harold. Neither liked what they were hearing. As the afternoon progressed, additional calls were made. Former customers began answering. Some were confused. Some were emotional. A few sounded shocked that anyone was finally asking questions. One elderly veteran broke down crying during a phone conversation. He explained that he had spent months believing he was responsible for a delayed disability payment. Now he was learning the delay may never have been his fault. Ryan listened quietly. The stories kept coming. Different people. Different circumstances. The same result. Humiliation. Delay. Dismissal. Max rested his head against Ryan's knee. The dog seemed unusually calm, almost reflective. As if even he sensed the emotional weight filling the room. By late afternoon, Victoria had heard enough. She stood in front of Gregory. The former confidence in his posture was completely gone. "What exactly were you looking for?" she asked quietly. Gregory blinked. "What?" "When you flagged these customers." No answer. Victoria continued. "What made them suspicious?" The manager stared at the floor. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then he finally spoke. "They didn't fit." The words immediately hung in the air. Victoria narrowed her eyes. "Fit what?" Gregory realized his mistake too late. "The profile." Nobody spoke. Ryan noticed Marcus close his eyes briefly. The same excuse, the same thinking, the same justification. Victoria looked at the people gathered around her, then at the long list of names on the screen. 37 customers. 37 lives. 37 stories. And suddenly, everyone understood the same thing. Ryan Carter had never been the real target. He had simply been the latest target. The latest person to walk through Gregory Harlan's door. Victoria slowly closed the folder. The investigation was no longer about one customer. It was no longer about one check. It was no longer even about one bank branch. It had become something much larger. Outside, evening shadows stretched across Main Street. Inside the bank, phones continued ringing. Former customers continued answering. More names continued appearing. And with every new call, the scandal grew larger than anyone had imagined. Gregory sat alone in a chair near the office wall. Nobody spoke to him anymore. Nobody defended him anymore. Because by then, everyone understood the same uncomfortable truth. The audit had only just begun, and it was already uncovering far more victims than anyone expected. 3 weeks later, the story that had begun with a single check had become national news. Television stations covered it. Newspapers covered it. Veterans organizations shared it. What shocked people most was not what happened to Ryan Carter. It was discovering how many others had experienced the same treatment. The audit eventually expanded beyond the original 37 cases. Additional reviews uncovered more complaints, more delayed transactions, more customers who had quietly walked away believing they had somehow failed. The investigation left little room for interpretation. The findings were clear. Gregory Harlan had repeatedly targeted elderly customers, veterans, low-income residents, and people he personally believed did not fit the profile of successful clients. When the final report was completed, the bank's executive board acted quickly. Gregory's employment was terminated. His management certifications were revoked. Several regulatory agencies opened separate reviews into his conduct. The man who once controlled the entire branch left carrying a small cardboard box and years of damaged reputation. Ryan heard about it while repairing a fence near his property. He felt no satisfaction, no celebration, no desire for revenge, only sadness. Because every scandal left victims behind, and many of those victims had spent years carrying wounds nobody could see. The bank moved quickly to repair the damage. Formal apology letters were mailed to affected customers. Compensation programs were established. Old complaints were reopened. Cases that had once been ignored were reviewed again. One afternoon, Victoria Langford personally drove to Ryan's property. The spring snow had finally begun melting from the hills. Max spotted her vehicle long before it reached the house. The German Shepherd rose from the porch and walked calmly toward the driveway. Ryan followed. Victoria stepped out, carrying a folder. Unlike their first meeting years ago on the mountain road, she no longer looked frightened. Unlike their second meeting at the bank, she no longer looked angry. Now she looked relieved. "Took longer than I hoped," she said. Ryan smiled slightly. "But?" Victoria handed him the folder. The deposit cleared. Ryan opened it. The funds had officially been transferred. The legal battle was finally over. 4 years of courtrooms, 4 years of appeals, 4 years of waiting, finished. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Ryan found himself thinking about his father again, the old ranch house, the family land, the promises he had made standing beside a hospital bed years earlier. The money could never bring those things back. But somehow, seeing the case finally closed brought peace he hadn't expected. Victoria studied him carefully. "You know," she said, "most people would be shopping for a new truck." Ryan laughed. "Mine still runs. Most people would buy a bigger house. This one's big enough." She wasn't surprised. People who had survived war often learned that happiness and possessions were rarely the same thing. Before leaving, Victoria hesitated. "There is one more thing." Ryan looked up. "The board wanted me to ask if you'd consider speaking at a company event." Ryan immediately shook his head. "No." Victoria laughed. "I thought so." Then she drove away. Life returned to normal, at least for a while. But Ryan couldn't stop thinking about the stories he had heard during the audit. The elderly widow who almost lost access to her insurance money. The disabled veteran who blamed himself for a delayed payment. The former Marine sleeping in his truck because rising rent had left him homeless. Those stories stayed with him, especially the last one. Several days later, Ryan drove into town. Max sat beside him as always. Near the edge of town, they passed a small church. Outside stood 3 veterans waiting in line for a food pantry. One of them wore an old army jacket. Another used a cane. The third looked barely older than 30. For a long moment, Ryan watched them. Then he kept driving. But he couldn't stop thinking about them. That night, sleep came slowly. The next morning, he made a decision. Months later, construction began. The old warehouse near the railroad tracks was purchased and renovated. Unused offices became temporary housing units. Storage rooms became counseling spaces. A kitchen was installed. Then another building was purchased. Then another. People started asking questions. Word spread. Soon, everyone knew. Ryan Carter was using a significant portion of his settlement money to create housing and support services for homeless veterans. He never intended it to become famous. He simply remembered what it felt like to be overlooked, to be judged, to be dismissed. And he knew others carried burdens far heavier than his own. The project attracted volunteers, retired nurses, church groups, former service members, local business owners. One volunteer in particular stood out. Her name was Eleanor Pierce, a 74-year-old widow with silver curls, warm brown eyes, and endless energy, despite her age. After losing her husband, a Korean War veteran, she spent years helping struggling military families. She immediately became the heart of the project. People trusted her, people opened up to her, and somehow she always knew exactly when someone needed encouragement. Within a year, dozens of veterans had received temporary housing assistance. Several found permanent jobs. Others reunited with family members. Some simply needed someone to remind them they still mattered. On a bright autumn morning, the community gathered for the official opening ceremony. A modest sign stood near the entrance. Veterans Home Initiative. Nothing fancy, nothing grand. Exactly the way Ryan wanted it. The crowd filled the parking lot. Marcus Bennett attended with his father. Victoria Langford attended with her daughter. Margaret Doyle attended carrying homemade cookies. Many former victims from the audit attended as well. Some had never met Ryan before. Yet they thanked him anyway. Not because he had saved them directly, but because he had unknowingly exposed the problem that hurt them. As the ceremony ended, people began applauding. Ryan never liked being the center of attention. He shifted uncomfortably. Max seemed to enjoy it much more. The German shepherd sat proudly beside him, tail moving slowly against the ground while children approached to pet him. Laughter filled the air. For the first time since entering the bank months earlier, Ryan fully understood what had happened. The check had never been the victory. The lawsuit had never been the victory. Even the money had never been the victory. The real victory stood all around him. People who had been forgotten. People who had been ignored. People who finally had a place to come home to. As the crowd dispersed beneath the warm Montana sky, Ryan looked down at Max. The dog looked back, and together they watched the doors of the new center open for the very first residents. Sometimes, God's miracles do not arrive as sudden wealth, power, or success. Sometimes they arrive through justice that seemed impossible, through strangers who choose to do the right thing, or through a door that opens after years of disappointment. Ryan thought he was fighting for a piece of land and a check, but God had a larger purpose. His struggle exposed a hidden wrong, helped people who had been forgotten, and created hope for veterans who had nowhere else to turn. In our daily lives, we may never know why certain battles take so long. We may wonder why unfair things happen, or why our efforts seem unnoticed. But this story reminds us that God is always working in ways we cannot see. What feels like a setback today may become a blessing for many people tomorrow. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs encouragement. 1. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from and what lesson stayed with you the most. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story. May God bless you, protect your family, bring peace to your home, and guide your path wherever you are. Thank you for watching.